Ooh.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Warrior Leadership. We got JJ Hardy, the coach here, and DB, the therapist, which none other, the one and only. But our goal here in Warrior Leadership Podcast is to bridge the gap between coaching and therapy, but not just any coaching, leadership coaching, because we're all a leader. We just got to dig down deep. And by the way, when you can't, you got to get that other kind of help. Anyway, today we're doing the next in our 4-part series of emotional intelligence, and today we're going to talk about empathy. So I like to get the smart guy's point of view first. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to DB. DB, as far as emotional intelligence is concerned, how does empathy play into that? I want to hear it.
Okay, empathy, man. Empathy is very interesting because a lot of times I think individuals believe that they're showing empathy when they're really showing sympathy for someone. And there's two different concepts, right? Empathy is being able to walk and put yourself in someone's shoes and see it from their perspective. Whereas sympathy is feeling sorry for people. And feeling sorry for someone doesn't help someone grow. It doesn't help them. It doesn't benefit them at all. And it will burn you out trying to sympathize with people. I think often people believe that being empathetic it will do the same thing, but it's not. It's two totally different concepts. And, empathy, in my opinion, is where we can kind of create some emotional and spiritual boundaries between that other person. Whereas sympathy, there is no boundaries there.
No, there's not. And, I like to say when I'm helping other people in the coaching realm that I try very hard to listen when people are telling me what's going on with them or what struggles they're having. And when I respond to what they're saying and I meet them where they are because everyone is not in the same space. I mean, you can't just, I find this very hard because I'm a very kind of a person, right? But sometimes I gotta dull that level of spirit down a little bit because sometimes people need you to be a little bit more calm, a little bit more collect, and kind of meet them where they're at. And when they're having a hard time, if you are overwhelming to them, you're not going to be able to connect. And so when it comes to emotional intelligence, you really have to kind of understand how to read another person. And, coming from a workplace perspective, which is where I'm at a lot of the time, because we talk about leadership and how that affects work, how life at work, you got to understand the strengths and weaknesses of each person on your team, and you cannot treat everybody the same. You got to treat them the way they need to be treated and the way they deserve to be treated, by the way, because we're all human beings. We're not the same.
Yes. This understanding others' emotions concept, right, is very important because when you understand someone's emotion, in therapy we call it a therapeutic alliance and rapport building, and that goes with the same concept of meeting people where they are, right? And there's a certain groups of people who you will work with, and you get this read on them when they come in the room. So for example, work with a lot of military veterans and service members, and I also work with Division I athletes. And what I notice is that with those two populations, and it's not a one size fits all, but for the vast majority of them, you got to kind of throw in a couple of 4-letter words in there when you're talking to them, man. And that's one of the things that, I learned in school, right? So in school, we took this anthropology class, and they made us write papers about, our own religious beliefs and our own bias, right? And that class was very important for us to all understand that we have to meet people where they are. And so it's kind of like when in Rome, do what the Romans do, right? You have to, in order to help someone sometimes, jumping in that foxhole with them and using their language. It's not that you're this swear box, right, where you're constantly in there cursing in the session necessarily, but it's important as a tool to be able to develop that rapport. And you know, sometimes it almost feels like, you know how politicians sometimes every once in a while they'll, you know, kind of change their dialect and change the way they speak to fit whatever audience they're in. But it's a very effective tool in being able to have that empathy and meeting someone where they are. And for me as a therapist, I think it makes me genuine, it makes me authentic, and it makes me connect with people. And JJ, I'm sure as a coach, you know, you're able to do that same thing, wear different hats and be able to connect with people based on who the audience is, right?
Yes. Yes. And you know, it's very it's very important to understand that when you're meeting people where they are, that doesn't mean that you have to change you or anything like that. All it means is that if you care enough about other people to help them, that you're just giving them the extra time, effort, and energy to make sure, you know, I mean, meeting them where they're at. I mean, you got to understand that that means that no matter what personality type or what strength that they have, that you're catering to that. And you don't have to change who you are. This doesn't make you weak to change the way that you show up for another person. It just doesn't. And a lot of people say there are certain times where applies in a good way, and a lot of ways that it applies in a bad way. But people are like, oh, I'm not going to change me. I'm going to be me. I'm not going to change me.
Right.
But guess what? I'm not asking you to change you. You know, all the guys that I've had to mentor in a leadership position for throughout all these years, I would say, I don't need you to change. I just need you to have enough understanding to be able to get on the same level as your soldiers back in those days. Or in the civilian world, I would say, you know, you need to get on the level with your other people, because if you don't, you're going to lose them. Right. And if you lose them, and we have a member of the team that is now considered a weak link, maybe that weak link isn't that person down at the lower level. Maybe that weak link is you, because you're not willing to adapt.
Mm-hmm. Right. You know, I want to make a point that I've noticed with this idea of empathy and understanding and showing emotions. The majority of my clients are males, and I've noticed the theme over the years of just working with men, where time and time again, men have come in and said, "Mr. Brown, am I a narcissist?" Right? They ask this question, and it increasingly, definitely since the pandemic, and I'm saying hundreds of men coming in asking me the same question, and I'm like, you know, where is this coming from? And then you start, you know, doing a little research, and you start looking online, and you start to hear this narrative, right, that's coming out where, you know, there's this over like, people are diagnosing their partners based on information that they read online or information that's they're sharing with each other. And so I want to make something very clear, is that, you know, it's important to note that while most narcissistic individuals may display, you know, lack of empathy, that's not necessarily a full-blown diagnosis. And if you're not a licensed professional, you should not be diagnosing your partner with narcissism, because they may show traits of, like, where they're lacking empathy. Like, there could be so much more to that. And so the reason why I'm bringing that up is because, put it like this: if a man is coming in and seeking therapy, right, the fact that they're in my office, that lets me know all I need to know whether or not they're narcissistic or not. Because, and I hate to use this as an example, but, you know, classic textbook narcissists are Adolf Hitler, Saddam Hussein. Do you think they ever came and sat in a chair and talked to a therapist? Probably not. And I know that's an extreme example, but I really want to paint this picture, because my heart goes out to those men who are coming in and are really questioning whether or not they're an animal or not, because in their minds, that's the way that they're perceiving. It's almost like the word narcissist is synonymous with animal, or, you know, and so, you know, the fact that, you know, just encouraging, man, that it's about developing that empathy. And I really believe that therapy can really help with that, help you I mean, and we talk about the intersection between coaching and therapy. I think when you can help someone dig underneath that iceberg, identify emotions that they feel first, then they can become emotionally congruent with their partner, emotionally congruent with their, coworkers, if they're a business owner, with their employees. And it is a process. And I think at that point where you help them identify those core emotions, then that follow-up to coaching is important. That way they can sustain the work that they've done in therapy. And for me, I think that's where that clear bridge is between coaching and therapy. Would you agree? And do you have any other thoughts you want to add to that?
Yeah, I do. So, I have worked with a few people that I couldn't help. And it wasn't because they didn't want to move forward in their life. It was that they had these roadblocks there that they weren't willing to, that they just weren't willing to change within themselves. That is that point where they need a little bit of extra help. And I'm glad I met DB, and then that we reconnected again in the past few months, because, people like him. Sometimes people don't want to go to a hospital or a formal clinic and have something on their medical record. And I think that getting a private practice to help somebody is just what they'd be looking for when it comes to that. Because that's the other objection that I get, right? When, by the way, coaching is for people that are ready to go, and I make great people champions. But when you can't move forward, which is why I was bringing up the other stuff, that's when you need therapy. And, the private practices are really good for that, because you'll have a record with that private practice, but it's not going to go in your big binder that you have over at your major hospital or whatever the case may be. And a lot of people that I work with, they don't want to go to that big clinic. They don't want to go to that hospital. They don't want to go to the VA because it's going to tarnish their record. They think it's going to tarnish their record, which that makes me sad, because that little thing that's a misconception. But they are so worried about what gets put in black and white and how it's going to affect the jobs that they apply for in the future and all of these other things, that they're not even willing to get help. And so I'm glad people like DB are out there, because I think he can kind of help with that.
Yeah, and talking about empathy, man, my heart goes out to those individuals, man, our first responders, our veterans, our medical professionals, our lawyers, our high value people, right? People that are very important in our society. They're not going to go to those larger healthcare systems. They're not going to utilize their insurance. And again, I've over the, just years of being in private practice, I've watched that sort of that grow, where those individuals have been reaching out for help. And again, the striking numbers here, man, is that when you look into some of those populations of people, they have high rates of suicide, high rates of alcoholism, high rates of substance abuse. And yet we look at them and we're like, well, they're a doctor, they're at the top of their game, they have all this money. Even entertainers, man, billionaires, right? These, and when you speak of empathy, that's one of the things that I really have challenged myself on, because I always thought that, going into therapy, this is for quote unquote poor people, right? So like poor people with just medical insurance, like Medi-Cal and things like that. Those are the only people who need help. Well, that's the farthest thing from the truth. But the other thing that I think is important is that, being able to open my mind up and develop that empathy. And coach, you helped me with this a lot, which is, think about this. If we were to help the business owner with some deep rooted trauma or some issues that were going on, and then get them into coaching, now what happens when they bring that back to their workplace, to the employees that are under them that may have insurance? Now you just created a different culture within that workplace. And now those individuals may or may not need to go and seek therapy, which, by the way, we have a limited supply of therapists, man. There's not the pipeline. There's not a lot of therapists in the pipeline. And so if the strategy is to help those individuals at the top, then that culture will trickle down once that environment shift. And I think that's why when you talk about empathy, man, my heart goes out to those individuals, because we all in our society, we always think that those individuals are the strongest and so they don't need help. But in reality, they're the ones who really need the help, and they don't have that option to reach out. And so it's just it's amazing, man, and a blessing to even have that platform and that space to be able to help those individuals.
You know, I went to an industry event today. I'm not going to name which one it is, but there was a guy who got up in the front, and he's a therapist just like you are. And, you know, he briefed some pretty shocking numbers
Yes.
in the construction trades. And this leads to suicide, and suicide was also a pretty high percentage, but it's like 160 out of every 1,000 people end up being addicted to alcohol or opioids.
Yes.
And, you know, from there, it's a downward spiral. And, you know, I know this and you know this, but I'm going to brief this to our audience as well. You know, the fix for that is bringing people that have either experienced what it means to have a group of people, if they're not a therapist, to come over and talk to your team, or to get a therapist himself to go over and not only talk to the team, but to offer support on the company's dime if needed. Because the worst thing you can do in a company is have uneducated leadership. And the uneducated leadership will not show any empathy or sympathy at all for people that are going through these hard things. They'll be really upset when something bad happens to them. But then all the warning signs that led up to that, they were missed because of a lack of education. So when it comes to empathy, it's so multifaceted. You have to, when I say meet people where they are, if they're having a drug addiction and they come up to you, that doesn't mean to hell with you, you have a drug addiction. No, that means you have a drug addiction. What kind of help can we get for you?
Yeah.
You know, you got to meet people. When I say meet people where they are, that can explode to so many levels. And it's so important to address this. You know, it's just emotional intelligence is really, really hard because you get so focused on meeting your numbers and getting the work done and doing all of those things that can keep that business afloat. And you forget that your business is nothing more than an idea with a bunch of work that's filled and completed by people.
Yes.
And if you don't take care of those people, and if you don't have empathy, this is not the stuff for you, right? This is the stuff for them. This is where the servant leadership comes into play. You need to be out there for those individuals. And by the way, that's not just something that I talk about, and that's not something that DB will just talk about in the future. That is a mission for us.
Yes.
Especially for veterans.
Yes, sir. You know, that's so powerful, man. And you know, I wrote that quote in there. You know, you just said the uneducated leadership will not show empathy. And, you know, I've been holding this back, but I'm gonna share it, man. Is that I had several uneducated leaders throughout my life, man, where they didn't understand what I was experiencing and what I was going through, and they responded the wrong way because they were uneducated. And so one of the things, man, when I first got back home from Iraq, you know, I had a lapse in judgment, man, and I failed a drug test when I first got back home. And, you know, I had a new incoming commander into my unit, and, you know, he apparently wanted to clean house. And so he was going to make an example of me. And for whatever reason, man, I pushed back against him because he never asked, you know, why I was doing it, what was going on in my life. He didn't realize that, you know, I was fresh. I was a year or two back from Iraq, and dude, I was seeing helicopters flying over my house and all that stuff. I was up pulling security on my house. And so marijuana was the only thing I found as an outlet. and then to now to see where we're in a time where, they're talking about legalizing the very thing that I was basically told that, my behavior wasn't congruent with being a soldier in the United States Army and I would never have a job again. Well, clearly that was a lie. And
Yeah.
so now, that person who was very uneducated, very lacked empathy, it's one of the reasons that now as a leader, when I see veterans or individuals go through things like that, I always I understand the addiction or the issue as a symptom of a bigger problem, and I never judge them based on that. And so there's tons of stories, man, where individuals I've worked with in this field of human services, I call it, where they have complete turnarounds because I had that empathy, and that is, you have to be an educated leader in order to do that. An uneducated leader will cause for an individual to keep spiraling because, and you get in those situations, and it's like you feel helpless and you feel hopeless and you lack control, and so sometimes you reach for control and being defiant and rebellious, and really you're just rebelling against and hurting yourself. But the mind, while you're in that spiral, you're not recognizing that. And I think through all of the years of me going through therapy and working through my issues, I've been able to develop the tools necessary to, I call it, father myself, and to be empathetic for myself. Because the truth is this: we hope that people will be empathetic for us, but we can't guarantee that that's going to happen. And so, that's how I find myself in this career path of being a therapist, man. Look, I couldn't even talk about what I just talked about now in the past without tears coming to my eyes or feeling like I was a loser or I would never be good enough because of those words of that leader ringing in my ears and telling me who I was and who I was going to become. And I'm proud and able to stand and say this now on this platform without batting an eye and not feeling like, oh, I'm worried about what somebody's going to say if they hear it. Because the reality is that I'm much better than I was. And if I hadn't gone through that, I wouldn't have the platform that I have today, man. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to just learn from that, right? I learned from it, I grew from it, and now I'm helping other people, man. And it's an extreme blessing, man.
So I thank you for sharing that, not just with me, but with the audience here. That is not an easy thing to share. So I do want to point out to everybody who's listening, if you're a supervisor, a manager, director, a VP, or maybe you're a business owner, there is no way, if you haven't dealt with some things and had those severe emotions on the job, that we expect you to understand the type of person who has been through those complexities. What we are asking you, and by the way, it's a servant leader responsibility, is to just show a little understanding. You don't have to understand where they are. You just have to understand that they're in a tight spot. And when you understand when somebody is in a tight spot, you may not know what they're going through, but you can kind of meet them a little bit and not feel sorry for them. Just, have a structured conversation where you can ask them what they need to receive support. They might not want to talk to you, and they don't have to talk to you, but there's going to be somebody around that they will. This is why it's important to know your people in the workplace and understand who they are and understand their strengths and weaknesses. Because if they show up to work one day, and usually they're the best employee in the world, but now they're flying off the handle, we're going to ask you to show empathy. Don't chastise that person. Don't just smack them in the face with insubordination. There's a root cause there that you're missing if you do. It's time to say, come with me. We need to talk about this somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Take them behind closed doors and let them say what's on their mind. And when they're done, you can just say, are you done?
Yep.
Now what's really going on?
That's right.
If you don't do that, you're missing a major responsibility. You're missing a key component that, by the way, is being missed all over the place. And you can affect the suicide rate, the alcoholism rate, the opioid rate, and all of those things just by doing that one thing.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Because
And
yeah, I've been there too, my friend.
Yeah. And I'm gonna shout out to the last two supervisors I've actually had were the exact opposite of what I just described. And it's to that point, which is comforting to have a supervisor where you can come into their office and you can let them know unapologetically how something is making you feel, right? So I just had this call the other day. Literally, I came to my boss. He was like, Derek, you good? He knew I wasn't good. And so I felt safe to tell him, look, I'm frustrated. This is why I'm frustrated. And the powerful thing about that conversation is that he was able to come away. We both able to come away from it and say, number one, your frustration is valid, right? That's the empathy. Your frustration is valid, but we left with an action plan on what to do next with the frustration. Meaning, I'm a human, right? I'm a warrior, but I'm also a human. And I have the right to be frustrated when I'm working in a system that we all acknowledge that is bureaucratic. It has a lot of red tape. It has all these other barriers sometimes to support the people who we're trying to support. And I think that happens in anything we do in life, right? In life, there's always barriers and obstacles and things that come up. And so to have a place where you can process that and then move forward, right? Getting into that space where, like, all right, I have a solution, and we call it solution focus, right? I see the problem. What's the solution to it? But you don't get to that place unless you have that empathy and warm regard first.
So empathy and warm regard. And this is why it's also important to teach your managers and employees problem-solving skills. If you can't even recognize how to analyze a problem and figure out the solutions to get there, you're not going to be able to figure out a person and analyze how to solve a problem for them either. It's so multifaceted, right? Empathy works. If you can't solve problems, you're not going to be able to solve your own, and you're not going to be able to solve anybody else's. But if you don't care about people, by the way, you shouldn't be a manager or a leader anyway. But if you are, then, you need to lean on those people around you. That another high quality of a leader is that when something is going wrong and you can't solve it yourself, maybe you're a great numbers guy, but you're not really a people person, right? Well, guess what? Lean on another supervisor.
Yes.
Lean on your director. Lean on another one of your down trace managers or supervisors that are working for you. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you skin the cat if the cat needs to be skinned. Yep. Well, we're talking about empathy here, so I don't know if that was a very good analogy, but you got to get the job done. If you're good at getting the job done with numbers, but then you can't deal with people, make sure you find somebody that can deal with people so that you're always squared away.
Yep. That's good advice, man. That's great guidance,
it's the only way to go.
Yep. And I'll say this too, just to follow up with that. The day and time where, as a leader, you're just a numbers person. I don't care if you're like a Fortune 500 company.
I agree.
You have what is it called? Corporate social responsibility. Even the billion-dollar brands who are definitely all about profit, and we know that, they still have to acknowledge people. And so if those organizations have to do that, then I think all industries need to really take heed. And if not, then as a leader, as a manager, you'll definitely need to be reaching out to some therapy and some coaching, because we just came out of a global pandemic. People are frustrated. People are tired. people have, there's economic issues going on in our country. There's all these factors that are coming together and coming to a head. And as a leader, if you think you're just going to come in and like not have empathy, then you need to be watching out for your job and your position, because at that point you'll be expecting people to have empathy for you when you lose your job. Because at the end of the day, no matter what field of work you're in, people drive the industry. I know we have this artificial intelligence and all this technology out there, but
all created by people.
It's all created by people. There you go.
So I know we're over our time just a little bit,
Yes.
but I have one final. So I'm the leadership coach, right? The coach, JJ Hardy, the coach. I will say this. It's an expectation and it's a principle. Ownership. Taking responsibility for everything within your sphere of influence. So guess what? If your sphere of influence, say you're a manager and you're accountable for a job, but you're also accountable for all the people doing for that job, anything they do right or wrong, they're going to be looking at you for that. But if somebody on your team injures another person on the job, gets drunk on the job, starts doing drugs on the job, I don't even want to talk about suicide, because there's a different level of holy crap that goes on when something like that happens. But if people are doing all kinds of craziness on the job, they're not going to go directly to that person. They might scream at that person, but they're going to be going to their leader. They're going to be going to their manager, their supervisor, their director, their VP. Hey, Joe Snuffy was over there just doing A, B, C, and D. Did you know about this? Guess what? If you don't, you better find out, because you own that person. Well, not physically own that, but they're under your sphere of influence. So you're accountable for what they do. So in other words, that's part of your ownership responsibility, is to make sure that you are tracking what that person's doing, knowing if that person's okay, knowing if that person is getting the job done. If you're not owning that, and if you don't have the ability to take ownership for those things, and you're just blaming Joe Snuffy for all this other crap that he's doing, shame on you, my friend. But that's a whole other conversation. I can do a whole 30 minutes to an hour on ownership. It's literally the most basic but important principle of leadership. If you can't take ownership, you should never call yourself a leader. Ever. Bottom line, up front. Done. Okay. You have any closing comments, DB? I kind of got serious there for a second.
No, I'm not. You think I'm coming behind that?
No? Okay.
No, that's final comments, man.
Well, then I'll close it out by saying, if the things we said in this live stream podcast, if they resonated with you, like the video, subscribe if you're on YouTube, share, repost. But the most important thing is, if there's some stuff here that you want to talk about, you can either reach out to one of us, but comment in the comment section and keep the conversation going. One of us will get back to you, or maybe somebody else in our audience will get back to you, but create a dialogue with this. That's how important issues get brought to the surface. If they're kept quiet and they're turned into the elephant in the room, they're just going to get worse. So that's it. Warrior Leadership with JJ and DB. We are signing out.